I had an article come out this week in my Substack, National Telegraph, Daily Bell, and I don't know who else. Yeah, I got a bunch of other publications that seem to be picking up my stuff. And it was about, well, I'll give you the name of the article here. It's called, God, you talk about ridiculous. I've been sitting on this for a little while, and this is just a taste, by the way, of what's going on. It's called Navigating Hate or Catching Criminals, the Absurd State of Police Training. The subtitle reads, Two controversial officers have yet to face disciplinary action. There's two takeaways from the article. The first is, I showed a screenshot in it. It's from the police training modules in Canada that have been broadcasted. In this case, it's across Ontario. And the police training modules, there's 4 of them that really stuck out for me. And there's a whole bunch of others, but this was just, a current, and this is going back several months. But these are the current training modules that police officers are being subjected to in Canada. The little bit of context around that, somebody had said to me, who is a police officer in Canada, said, who's very anti-woke, as all cops are. All cops with a brain are. He said, when I was in police college, which was 25 years ago, 30 years ago, something like that, he said, because I asked him about what they learned about intelligence gathering, the Muslim Brotherhood, political entryism, all the stuff that's going on in Canada, because we do have this foreign issue in our politics here. And he said to me, when I was in police college, I had one course, in gathering intelligence and surveillance. One. He did say, though, I had 19 courses, 19 in anti-racist policing. This was 25 years ago. So you can imagine how much things have, quote, progressed since then. So that's the state of Canada. So anyways, the modules that I show a screenshot of in the article are these 4, okay? Now remember, the context is these are the guys with the guns who are supposed to be serving the community and catching the bad guys who either, vandalize, steal, rob, mug, or do worse things, right? Gangsters. So let's think of the Crips and the Bloods, right? That was a problem in the United States, which is fallen by the wayside to the ISIS gangs that are forming. But we'll talk about that another day. So guys with guns who are supposed to be working for us, serving the community and protecting people. And yeah, I know, Freedom Convoy. Saw that went out the window too. All right. First module. Remember, bad guys being caught by good guys. The rights and cultures of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This is in their module of how to catch bad guys. The rights and cultures of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Well, at least they didn't say Eskimo, right? Number 2. I hope I just set some people's hair on fire. Number 2. Ontario's diverse, multicultural, and multiracial society. Yes, remember, guy just stole your car. He's on the highway doing 200 kilometers an hour. He may kill someone. He may have drugs on him and a gun and whatever. Ontario's diverse, multicultural, and multiracial society. That's really going to help you in a car chase, right? Number 3, systemic racism. All those laws in the books that say it's illegal to hire people of certain ethnic groups and minorities? Those laws that exist in Canada? I'm just kidding. They don't exist. Where they exist? They exist, and I love how Scott has branded this. What the left is obsessed with, the Department of Imaginary Concerns. They just imagine all these things are going on, and they've just imagined that we have systemic racism on the books. But, that's only if you're a maniac, right? And then the 4th one that stuck out from what I saw of this group of modules is navigating the complexities of hate. Apparently, hate is a crime. Hate is a crime, right? But it's only certain hate, right? Because it's complex. If the hate is waving the, you know, terminate the people in the Middle East who don't speak Arabic, then it's okay. But everything else, that's not okay, right? Because you got to navigate it, right? So yeah, those are the 4 police modules that this is how we're going to train cops. There was an incident that was happening in Canada many years ago that these sorts of things never even make the news. It's crazy. Do you ever see the movie Heat? If you've seen the movie Heat, that was actually occurring in Canada. What happened was there's some vehicle that was going out, intermittently, like every few months, 6 months, a year, like it was spread out. And it was some sort of modified, very high velocity, very strong armored vehicle. I guess they converted some sort of, Chevy pickup or something into, remember the movie Tango and Cash? They severely, it was something like that. And what they would do is they pull up on the highway beside somebody, and they would throw something onto the door. It was, magnetic, or stick on the window or whatever. They do different things different times. They put something and it would be some sort of explosive charge, and they tell people, they'd signal roll down the window. So the person would roll down the window, and they would have a gun and a mask, and they would say pull over. And they would take the person's car, their keys, all their everything, and they would rob them. They would kidnap them, throw them in the trunk, go to their home, take all their stuff, like this. And this was going on for years, and nobody knew this was happening. This is happening in Canada. And then finally, it took a while, but they finally apprehended this gang that was doing this to people. And what was really odd, it was an anomaly in law enforcement. When they finally saw they brought them into the station to book them and whatever, and the cops were talking amongst each other, like, you're not going to believe who these guys were. They were all like 60 and 70-year-old white guys who lived double lives as like business people, or I think one was a dentist, if I'm mistaken, something like that. And the reason that was so topical is because that was an anomaly. It was so rare. But when the cops were trying to catch the bad guys, they weren't really concerned about navigating hate and navigating the complexities of hate, systemic racism, Ontario's diverse, multicultural, and multiracial society, and the concerns of First Nations people. Maybe they should have. Maybe that should have been their primary concern when they were investigating. But that's the clown world that Canada has become. This week, I'm sure some of you have seen what we all saw, which was the conversation on Joe Rogan between comic Dave Smith, who doesn't seem to do much comedy, Douglas Murray, and Joe Rogan. And I posted a tweet on this, and the tweet read this. It said, today I learned 3 things. You remember the whole Today I Learned meme, or that section in Reddit? So today I learned that, number 1, comic Dave Smith is bisexual. He's not bisexual, but he's libertarian, and that was the joke. Number 2, the IMF is a credible libertarian source. Number 3, Dave Smith does not trust but verify. For anyone trapped in the progressive echo chamber, Douglas K. Murray castrated him, which is exactly what he did. He castrated him. Good morning, Jesse. It's good to see you, dear. Jesse, did you see this conversation with Joe Rogan and Dave Smith and Douglas Murray? So anyways, if you haven't watched it, you got to watch it. It was so beautiful. It really was. Because it seems to be like it's that same tactic we see when there's a subversion of a political movement, that people who are tied to some wing of the uniparty embed themselves in it, and then they start saying just ridiculous stuff about World War II or Hitler. Like, you can see they're doing that to the Trump campaign, they're embedding themselves in it, and then they're doing this historical rewrite to make Trump look bad. I think that might be what happened. There's happening. There's a couple of different strategies, but anyways, the point is, you should watch it. It is a beautiful exercise in persuasion, interrogation, communication, deceptive persuasion techniques, and authentic persuasion techniques. And you'll see with Dave Smith, he's trained. He's definitely trained in this art of influence. And I was going through the list of all the different tactics that he was using: pacing and leading, anchoring. There's a whole long list of them, but he was focused primarily, kept using pacing and leading because I think he realized very quickly he was in over his head. But there was a couple of things that I don't know if people noticed, and for those of you who watched it will understand, I think. There was a couple of tells. So one of them was, a tell is, what they say when it's a little thing that happens that you can now read the person. NPC, you're not very NPC. That is, I don't disagree with you, brother. That's on Substack, by the way. So if you're on Substack, you can post comments. If you're on YouTube and all this stuff, you can post comments. And on Locals, you can post memes and pictures, which I highly encourage. And the more offensive, the better, to be quite honest. So anyways, there was a point where, I'm sure you all saw it, where comic Dave Smith admits that although he talks endlessly about Israel with a defamation frame, and most of what he said is complete nonsense, factually incorrect and fabricated. When he was asked by Douglas Murray, remember the part, and he says he's never even been to the region, he's never been in the country, he's never been in the region, never spoken to anybody on the ground. Okay, fine. But then he says to him, and this was a persuasion tactic, is to communicate empathy. He says, I understand. I maybe understand kind of your worldview now because you've never even been there. And he said, I'm willing to bet that you're going to tell me that Gaza was like a concentration camp. You probably believe that too, don't you? And Dave Smith's response was the tell. Very revealing. What did he say? He said, well, they share many similarities, I would think. Let me repeat that. They share many similarities, I would think. Can you see the tell? And there's a combination of the body language too. The tell is the I would think. What do you mean you would think? What all of a sudden you're not sure? What do you mean? You spend every day for the past year parroting fabrications from the Muslim Brotherhood about that region of the world, and now it's just, well, I would think. You would think? And that's the tell that his subconscious knows one of two things. Either his subconscious knows he's blatantly lying, or his subconscious doesn't have confidence in what he's saying, and he's realizing, I really have no clue about this. One of the two. There could be a third that I'm not considering. But that was a very, very important admission in my life, especially for somebody who spends so much time in commenting on that side of the world, we'll say it a little bit more charitably. There was another tell. There was a moment where Joe Rogan, and I encourage you to watch it. I explained this on a space yesterday. I encourage you to watch it. There was a moment where Joe Rogan cuts off Douglas Murray and says, Douglas, you have to let him talk. Now, they were both talking past each other. Both of them were doing it. And I would argue maybe it was started by Dave Smith, who had already been slipping into cognitive dissonance because his worldview was been challenging. That's one of the 7 signs of cognitive dissonance that I've discussed on this stream many times before. We'll talk more about that in the future another time. But he said to Douglas Murray, he says, Douglas, you have to let him talk. Me and what I saw that is he was starting to slip into a little cognitive dissonance himself, and was interesting. You got to stop the camera. The A camera shifts back to Joe Rogan for a split second. You have to stop it and watch those frames. Why? If you look at Joe Rogan frozen in that frame, he is so trapped in cognitive dissonance, it doesn't even look like him. It does not even look like him at all. His brow was all furrowed, and it was just completely out of character for him. That's the cognitive dissonance face. That's what's happened. That's the face you get from somebody when you've completely undone their worldview and they're struggling to process it. They make that face. Once you see it, because I've done that many times to other people, but once you see it, you can never unsee it. And I would argue this is the danger. Not the danger. I hate that when they use that word. I think this is the challenge when somebody like Joe Rogan spends a lot of time. Listen, I'm a free speech absolutist. Platform everybody. Go ahead, right? Sunlight is the best disinfectant, even if you're going to get a little burned, right? It's the best thing that we hear all the maniacs, so we know who the maniacs are. But the problem is when you spend so much time platforming maniacs, like he's very close with Alex Jones, who's, his entire career is about the Zionists and the lizard people and whatever. Okay, fine. Then he had recently on that historical that maniac. What's his name? Daryl Cooper, the guy who spends 30-hour streams trying to brainwash people to undo their view of history. And Ian Carroll, the communist Bernie bro, who all of a sudden, he's getting platformed by the right because, he has woke left perspectives, and they're bringing the woke left perspectives into view. People need to stop using Joe Rogan as news. Well, that is true, and I'll tell you that. I'll touch on that in a second. And so the problem is when you're surrounding yourself with a certain set of views over and over again, all of us, me included, everybody, we will adopt the views that we hear most frequently. It's in we're wired that way. That's our operating system. And that's why we're always chasing confirmation bias for the same reason. So if you're always surrounding yourselves with the same opinions over and over again, all that's going to happen is it's going to be reinforced with you, and it's going to be hard written in your code. And then it becomes very difficult to expunge it. And you can see it by some of the responses of people who, like I posted this, and the post that went somewhat, I don't know, viral, but it got, a few 100,000 engagements. You can see by the people who struggle to process it because they have spent so much of their time, invested so much of their time in simplistic thinking about how the world works, because, you have a simple solution to the world. That's easy. That's nice and cozy. We don't want to live in a world that is abundantly complex, which is the way the world actually is. And so if you're always chasing confirmation bias and you're going towards the same opinions over and over again, you can't see it. If we sometimes do it to ourselves. That's how sometimes people brainwash themselves. That's how it happens. And so once they adopt it like a religious worldview, it becomes very difficult for them to undo it. And you can show them all the facts in the world on any topic. You can, I don't know, signed and sealed, documented proof on an issue, whatever it is, to show that what they believe is completely fake. You know what happens? Do you ever hear anybody admit that they're wrong? There's a reason. Because they cannot process it. You can show it to them right in front of their face. They won't be able to process it. Doesn't matter. They will see the world completely different from you because they're viewing it in a frame they constructed for themselves. And I would argue that is why Joe Rogan had the cognitive dissonance face in that period where he told Douglas to, you know, just let him talk, be quiet, because Douglas already was eroding a newfound, I think, newfound worldview that he's been exposing himself to. And he's realizing that, oh, wait, Douglas is tearing it apart bit by bit, block by block. And listen, it's not criticism of Joe Rogan. It happens to everybody. And I think he actually was quite good natured about it. But this is the danger if you always surround yourself with the same opinion. And this great account on Substack called NPC says Yuri Bezmenov says this also. Yes, exactly, because this is I describe it as, and maybe because I'm a computer guy and always was as a little kid, it's the operating system of how human beings work. That you have your OS, you have your CMOS, you have your BIOS, and you have your code. And people are wired the same way. And if you start to look at people that way, you can understand how people fall into these kind of traps. So, and speaking of libertarians, and by the way, that was the bisexual comment. It was hysterical when Douglas Murray he completely listen. I'm somewhat. I'm more, conservative libertarian in my political viewpoints, but I'm not a hardcore, Ron Paul reject that's, doesn't understand how the world works. This is a problem when people get so embedded in any philosophical worldview and they think this philosophical worldview is the only one that works, then you fail to understand how the world works because it's complex. And one philosophical worldview does not have all the answers to the world. That's just the way it is. And that's why it's important to listen to people you disagree with, sometimes more than the people you agree with, just so you can reaffirm the way that you're viewing the world is correct. I remember I was at a very conservative meeting many years ago, I think after I was a candidate, if I'm not mistaken. And I was explaining to the people that, many of my influencers in the world have been, very liberal. And they looked at me like, what? I said, no, it's not that I'm on the far left. I actually disagree with them. But I don't need to have my own worldview parroted back to me every moment of every day to make me feel comfortable. I know how I view the world. I have enough life experience in different countries, living in areas that were paramilitaries and narcos and whatever. Like, I don't need to hear what I already think over and over again and reinforced. I want to hear the other side. I want to hear the people that I disagree with so I can understand why they're wrong in their argument. And sometimes, once in a while, yeah, maybe they got a point. Once in a while, right? Very rare anyone will admit they are wrong. Exactly. Because it's a challenge to our egos, because many of us, to different degrees, need to protect our egos. One of the things I do, I've mentioned on the stream in the past, the 5-minute journal, this exercise that I do where you start your day and you try to position yourself into a state of emotional gratitude. It's just a good way to start your day if you're going through a lot of stress, because you can't be both anxious and in a state of optimism and gratitude at the same time, right? But I added, and you do it in the morning, you do it at the end of the day as well. I added something to the end of the day, which was, what did I get wrong today? And the reason I do that is when you're confident and you believe in yourself and you think, you're trying to make all the right choices, you don't always, but you do your best. It's very easy for that to spiral out of control a little bit. And that's where the ego, kind of comes from. And that's when it's difficult to admit that you're wrong. And I find it one of the most difficult things is to try to remember, what did I get wrong today? Because we bias towards the positive, right? We bias towards the positive in our memory. Memories about, exes and people. It's always we reframe to the positive over time. And it's the same thing in our day to day. But I think there's a lot of value if we just look back at our day and say, okay, I must have gotten something wrong. What did I get wrong? Was it something I read about politics or an opinion or an idea or whatever? You should try it. It's really, really difficult. So speaking of libertarians, my panel from Bitcoin Medellin is online on Twitter. If you're interested in Bitcoin, I know some of you are. I don't talk a lot about Bitcoin on the stream, by the way, although I'd like to. I did a panel with Knut, and if you just follow the Bitcoin Medellin conference, you'll see. I don't know how much of our conversations they're putting up. I just saw something scroll by. And the panels that I did in Medellin, those were in English. My speech was in Spanish, but all of the panels I did are in English, and that might help new people trying to enter into the Bitcoin space and just want to have, as I call it, insurance money off the system. And particularly right now with markets, everything is yo-yoing. It's like the S&P is behaving more like Bitcoin than Bitcoin's behaving like the S&P at this point. But I encourage you to check that all out. And if you ever have any Bitcoin questions, please let me know. And that brings me to China, as Donald Trump calls it. China and the tariffs. And there's a lot of people that seem to be, there's a whole, obviously, always a divergent number of opinions, and a lot of them because it affects people's financial portfolio. And some people are freaking out, and people understand what's going on. And I'm going to try to give, a little bit of my take, if that helps. And I'm going to, preface this that for many years I was with somebody who was Chinese. And so, when you are with somebody for a long time, you get to know their culture and their history and what's really going on behind the scenes. So a couple important things. You see this trade war going on with Trump and China, and I don't know what the tariffs are up to now. It's 1,000%, 2,000%. I don't know. Who knows? I think we're at 125% last I heard, and we'll probably be up to 400%. Kevin O'Leary was at, I think it was a Senate hearing talking about this, and I'll get to that in a second. But some important context. So Xi Jinping, before he was picked as leader of the Communist Party, he was supposed to be like a Deng Xiaoping sort of guy. He was supposed to be, an open market, wants to engage in commerce around the world with the West, and didn't want to be adversarial towards the West and grow the Chinese economy. And he was seen as kind of a reformer type guy. And that was his whole brand and his reputation and whatever. Once he became leader, however, he very quickly turned into Mao. Just mask off, the complete opposite of all the things that he espoused over all the years he was involved in and engaged in politics, right? Like his daughter went to Harvard, lives in the United States, and everybody's like, okay, so he's integrated into I don't know why she's not thrown out of the country, but so he had all the signs of somebody who could be, a legitimate reformer who would not be antagonistic towards Taiwan. But he got elected, and he was the complete opposite. He also arrested, or what they call purging corruption. Yeah, it's always purging corruption. You love when they police themselves, right? Anyways, he arrested 4 very, very senior leaders in the Communist Party, including I think the guy's name was, I never pronounced it right, Sun Ying-kai, who was seen as the potential successor to Xi Jinping, who was also in that realm of being kind of a reformist sort of guy. And, as soon as he got elected, or shortly after he was elected, he had him arrested and jailed because of corruption. There's corruption everywhere, especially in communist parties. Well, conservative parties as well, in Canada for sure. So this was the anti-corruption purge. And the problem is, it's the same thing they did in El Salvador. This is why, El Salvador. Oh, there was a point where Nayib Bukele, everybody's here on the right, which is infuriating. Because the guy always said, as I put in my article on in Substack, Nayib Bukele said for many years, "Soy de izquierda radical. Está en mi sangre." De mi sangre. Yes, no, está. And what does that mean? It means I'm a radical leftist. It's in my blood. Yet somehow the Trump administration is celebrating him. And but he did the same thing. And I posted what he did it publicly in front of the news media. He had his whole cabinet around him and said, "I'm going to have all of you investigated. If I find any corruption, there's going to be," whatever he said, "hell to pay," or something like that. Yet somehow his national security advisor, who was brutally murdered and slaughtered after he was arrested on bullshit charges, no, nothing. The UN, who we're no fans of, have requested on behalf of the family, and Callum covered it in our video when we went down to El Salvador. He did the last 10 minutes. I encourage you, watch the video. El Salvador, the Bitcoin dictatorship. The name of the channel is Britannica. It's it's really good. It makes El Salvador look really good. It shows the change that's occurred, but he does touch on what happened to Alejandro in the end. And the United Nations is trying to get answers out of the Salvadorian government and to ask, how was your national security advisor? Why was he chopped up into little pieces before he's given back to the family, sort of thing? So anyways, Xi Jinping, same thing, behaving the same way. So China right now is at this point where it's never been so weak, and Xi Jinping is on glass. It's amazing. Yes, is walking on glass. I mean, yesterday I was watching a number of videos that some people sent to me of merchants, business owners in China that, like, it is very dangerous there to criticize the government, but openly criticizing the government, that we don't want these platitudes about nationalism and patriotism. It's about the economy. You're going to destroy our economy. Talk to the Americans. It's not the Americans' fault. And it was just fascinating to see so many people doing that. Why? Because the factories are shut down. Companies like Apple, I think Apple's one of them, but a number of companies have called factories in China and they've told them, stop all production. Just stop, right? Who can afford 100% tariff on anything? So they've stopped all production. Apparently, Shenzhen is basically shut down, like COVID. Just everybody's at home waiting for this to be resolved, which is putting an immense amount of pressure that they've never really experienced in the Xi Jinping government. But there's also something else that's been going on for a long time that we don't hear about because we don't get Western news. Again, when you have somebody close to you who's from that culture, you get to hear what's going on behind the scenes or going on the ground there. China has had regular protests from 10,000 people to 100,000 people on weekends in the north, in rural communities, for years, from before COVID. This has been going on. Many people obviously have been arrested. Lots of people have disappeared. But that country, this is why, like, people don't understand, when you go outside of Beijing and Shanghai, yeah, great, you see the tall buildings and that's wonderful. When you get out of there and you go to the rural areas, you go back 1,000 years. Like, they don't have electricity in that country. It is such an S-hole outside of the cities. And that's why it's kind of bursting at the seams. You have all these separation movements that are permeating below the surface. Manchuria wants to separate, Inner Mongolia wants to separate, Tibet wants to separate, part of the South wants to separate, where the Uyghurs wants to separate. Like, and all the communist leaders, the regional leaders, they all ignore Xi Jinping and the centralized party. Okay, they got Beijing, they got Shanghai and a few, and that's it. And I think it's Shanghai, if I remember correctly. And I worded this incorrectly in a space last night, and I'll correct it. that Xi Jinping saw the Deng Xiaoping faction that Sang Jin-kai was kind of plugged into. They're supposed to be the successor, because if you know, Xi Jinping declared himself a leader for life, which is, you want to talk about making your people hate you. That did not go well amongst the Chinese people, including his supporters. So if you remember during COVID, I think it was, I think I'm getting the city right. I think it was Shanghai. Um, I don't think it was Guangzhou. I think it's Shanghai, where there was a video and you could see at night all of these apartments and or condos, what do you want to call them? Not condos. You can't own anything in China. And there were people that were crying and yelling, and we want an end to this, because they're in their homes, they're starving, they're locked in their homes, they couldn't leave their buildings. And that's one of the videos that was leaked out to the West. That area, that was Deng Xiaoping, Sun Jin-kai territory. And that's why Xi Jinping was so brutal to them, because that was, I'm in power, I'm not leaving, sort of thing. Xi Jinping's doing the Wolf of Wall Street thing, right? And so my point in all of this, there is a lot of dynamics going on in China on the ground. It is not a homogenized society like the communists want to tell us. Like, what they got, 80, I think it's 80 million people who are members of the Chinese Communist Party. Remember something, that many of those people, like, the way it works, from what I understand from people there, is you get to, mid-level management, and you work in a factory, you're an engineer, whatever it is. And then the senior levels, they will invite you to join the Communist Party if you haven't joined. And if you don't, that's okay. You don't have to. You're not going to go to the gulag, but you're going to be run out of your job within 6 months. That's it. And then you and your family are going to be on the street. Oh, and your wife's family, wherever your wife's work, wherever she works, she's going to be fired as well. So how many of those 80 million people who are members of the Chinese Communist Party actually want to be there, versus they just joined out of duress because they want to keep their job, right? It is a paper tiger that's collapsing. Their economy is collapsing. They can't afford electricity. It is all bullshit in that country. It's total. And I think, people say, oh, it's never going to collapse. I think if it collapses, it's going to be like the fall of the Soviet Union. It's going to be overnight, just one day, boom, it's done. And I think a lot of people hope that that's what's going to happen. I have an article I'm working on. I'm going to release it to my Substack, and it's going to talk about how it's affecting small business here in a way that a lot of people don't even realize what's going on, because the political entryism, not the political entryism, the wrong word I'm using, the degree of economic manipulation, it's not just big business and, their whole car industry that was built on copying Western cars. I don't know if you've seen it. Go on the internet, search Chinese copies of American or European cars. That's how BYD became successful, and �𝐿𝐒. They just copied Western cars and put their logo on it, right? And they would fall apart after 18 months. And also on the topic of these tariffs, Kevin O'Leary was, I think, as I said before, I think it was in the Senate. He testified, said 100% is not enough. The tariffs should be 400%. That's basically an embargo. That's an embargo to beat the Xi Jinping and the Communist Party into submission. And what Kevin O'Leary correctly brings up is intellectual property. I mentioned they copied the entire car industry, right? Many years ago, I was getting involved in a project to manufacture in China. And, because I invented something, patented it, we were working on it, and then we were looking at, potential plants through agents in China. That's how it works. You get an agent in China, the agent works with a plant, and that's the lines of communication. And sometimes you go there and whatever. And I was just told point blank by people who had manufactured in China they said to me, just so you know, if you go to China, which is really the only place you can get mass manufacturing so cost efficient, and Tim Cook talked about this, Tim Apple, that it's the amount of engineers that they have and it's the amount of manufacturing infrastructure that they have that no one can beat because they've invested so much time there. So you really have no choice if you want to scale your business, but to, at least at that time, things are changing. But there was no other opportunity if you wanted to scale your business. The problem is, as they said to me, they will copy your product and your design the next day. And I remember saying, yeah, but I have a utility patent. Doesn't matter. It's China. They're just going to copy it and they will sell it through, a series of networks or cutouts all over the world. So it just became the point. I decided, like, okay, there's no point. There's no point putting all this effort in and have them stealing it, which is what they do. They steal everything. It's not the Chinese people. It's the Chinese Communist Party and how they do business, because they stifle innovation, because they stifle free speech. So they have no choice but to steal everything from the rest of the world who is not restricted and are able to innovate. NPC, Huawei used to be Nortel. Nortel was completely stolen through intellectual property. Yes, I believe that was the case as well. And also, one more thing. Notice how quickly. Remember Taiwan's going to be invaded? What happened to that? It's been, a week? 2 weeks? All of a sudden, you're not seeing those barges with the bridges that were, spooky, we're going to invade Taiwan. All of a sudden, that's done. And the people within the Trump administration, whether you like them or not, you have to give them credit for how brilliant this is, for understanding this is the opportunity. This is the time. They've never been so weak. They hate their leader because he's installed himself as a dictator. And it's not going to be, I don't think, the average person with pitchforks in the street that is going to maybe lead to the demise of the Chinese Communist Party. It's the billionaires, the people who do business around the world, who own all those factories. They don't care about communism. You know what they care about? Economics, money. And like, this is why the people infuriate me when they say, oh, everything's about money. Guess what? That's the one common denominator that allows everybody to work with each other, because at the end of the day, we all need to survive, right? The more we do commerce with people we disagree with and we dislike, the more you start to see conflicts will subside. And so I think it's those people that will lead to the demise of the Communist Party if they don't go to Washington begging and pleading and saying, okay, we'll give you a 0% free trade open market to China, which they can't afford to do, but they'll have no choice. And then the Trump administration is going to respond with, oh yeah, what about stealing all our stuff? Trump is really good, whether you like him or not. I happen to like him. Whether you like him or not, he's very good at painting himself into a position where he has two ways to win and no ways to lose. And China is learning that right now. Okay, thank you for joining. I got to run. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. You're wonderful. I'm going to try to do this more frequently, as I said. Jesse, I love you. I'll check out your comments later. I got to run because I'm late for a meeting, and I will talk to you all soon. And, my parting thought is, please be good to your friends